Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Okay, welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology primarily, and I also talk about art and spiritual adventure at times. But today, with the world reeling from a recent election, we're going to focus on astrology. I've got my old friend Tad Mann, who's agreed to offer his insights into the election and what we've seen as a result. It is quite a startling effect across the globe, not just the United States, not just for men, not just for women, but for everybody on the planet. I believe this is a really startling, a rude awakening. So it's worth talking about and discussing it from the viewpoint of astrology. I think it's very important to keep that in mind. Astrology does provide a lot of information for us, but we never really ever got Hillary Rodham Clinton's actual birth time, so that did cast a bit of a shadow over some of what we were looking at. There were some astrologers out there who definitely called this. Among them were some of the Vedic astrologers who have a different purview, a different view of what's going on, but nonetheless, we have what we have, and now the question is, what now? So it's a great honor to welcome back Tad Mann to the show. As always, Tad, it's great to have you on and to talk about this topic. So I'm curious as to what you think. What do we do now?
That's a very good question. I mean, I'm still, like many of you, I'm still kind of expecting to wake up in the morning and find out that it was all a dream.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Because it is very Neptunian. But it's interesting because I did notice on the day of the election, there's a phenomenon that some of you out there may know about called a void of course moon.
Right, of course, yeah.
And the idea of it is that when the moon is in each sign for about 2.5 days at a stretch, the last aspect that it makes before it leaves the sign, from that point until it moves into the next sign, is called void of course. And what it often shows is that expected results just tend not to happen.
Right.
And it turns out there was a void of course moon in the sign Aquarius that started around 10 o'clock in the morning or so on election day. And I was already thinking, although everyone was predicting Hillary would win, I was automatically thinking there's something fishy here, something unusual is going on that isn't going to turn out as planned, especially since in the evening when they started reporting the returns, around 8 or 9 o'clock Eastern time.
Right.
Suddenly the moon goes into Pisces and it's bearing down on Neptune. And I'm just thinking this is not a good sign at all. And having just been at a conference in California at ISAR where there were 2 panels of astrologers, all of whom predicted that Hillary would win. Well, we do know that she did win the general election.
Right, that's true. We can say that.
However, she didn't win the presidential election. And I just began thinking that this is really, it's a shock and surprise result, although Trump's people claim that it wasn't a big surprise. But it is, and it was, just because of the dynamic of the whole election cycle itself.
Well, I don't think that they saw it coming. I think they were as surprised as the Democrats. I don't think anybody really believed this would happen. As a matter of fact, I read something just yesterday that he had a conversation with Chris Christie saying that he probably wouldn't make it beyond October of 2015. So that his expectations of where he was going were actually very much out of line with what actually happened. So he, I think, in many ways, is as surprised as anybody, and with good reason. I mean, he's just stepped into the most vicious, demanding job anybody could ever imagine. And I don't see him as being particularly ambitious with regard to going to work every day and having to read through mounds and mounds of congressional briefs and stuff. I can't see that happening.
Well, yeah, he apparently has like a 45-second attention span. But It's interesting. It's interesting, Chris, that when you look at Trump's chart, the progressed and solar arc chart,
right,
that his ascendant it's a very peculiar place. It's 29 degrees and 58 minutes of Leo,
right,
meaning it's the very last 2 minutes of Leo before it goes into Virgo. Well, Leo as a sign, he has also obviously Mars in Leo and Pluto in Leo in the 12th house. But Leo as a sign is totally about speculation, which is what he does.
right. He does speculate.
So the progressed sun moves a degree per year. So for the last 30 years, which is essentially his business career, he's of course been speculating, and that's a very different dynamic than actually having a job. Well, the day of the election, the progressed sun is at 0 degrees of Virgo, and it's going to be in Virgo for the rest of his. Virgo's about hard work, about having to make decisions and choices
and details, and being, he's going to be, for someone who is incredibly thin-skinned, he's going to be under the microscope like you read about.
Absolutely. And not only that, he has no planets in Virgo. And as a result of this, he's not really, although you think of him, he's got to be grounded. He doesn't have a single planet in an Earth sign.
Yeah, no,
his midheaven is in Taurus. But as we know about his business career, that it's been very sketchy. And that it's essentially he uses a lot of other people's money. But it's so interesting to have a real estate developer who's got no earth in the chart.
It is pretty ironic. There's no question about it.
I also think right now he's going to really have to go to work. Like you don't get to fool around when you're president of the United States.
No, and he's used to being a sort of a jocular playboy, globetrotter, doing whatever he wants, going to his golf courses and doing things that he may deem as fun and, sort of pastimes, but he has got no idea. I mean, I was watching the press conference just the other day with President Obama talking about how he wasn't a very good organizer with papers because he would get mounds and mounds of briefs every day that he had to read. I don't think that Trump can possibly get through any of that. He's going to have to delegate all that.
I don't think so either. And the terrifying thing is the people he's choosing to delegate his responsibilities to are people that have really even more extreme agendas than his, which is really quite frightening. And I think that there's another factor which I thought about a lot as the campaign developed, which is we all knew that Hillary has Mercury in Scorpio. And Mercury in Scorpio, for those of you who aren't so much aware of that, Scorpio is very hidden. It's also about the way your mind works. And Mercury in Scorpio means that Hillary probably never forgets anything.
Oh, no way. She's got
But at the same time, it means that they purposefully hide a lot of what they do know. So there's like a kind of obscuration that goes on, or a tendency to have a lot of hidden issues. And of course, the interesting thing is that everyone became very suspicious of her. Not only things that she actually did do, but also, misjudgments and so on, but also a lot of things that she didn't do.
Yeah, I know. And they sort of become their own worst enemy in that regard because they're hiding things that if they had not hidden them, they would have been fine. But because they hid them,
right,
just the simple fact of the hiding gets them brings their motives into question. So they have this weird thing where if they were just up front in the beginning, they never would have had a problem. But by virtue of the fact that they go that mile because of the secretiveness, they unhinge themselves, and I think that's probably her biggest downfall. But granted, but she's also been in the spotlight and been picked apart and torn apart by so many people so many times. Anyone would forgive her for being secretive and being cautious, I think.
No, I agree. Well, but also, so the interesting thing is then when you look at Trump's Mercury, he's got Mercury in Cancer square to Neptune.
Right.
And what's interesting is that Mercury doesn't make many aspects, meaning that Trump may be clever, but he's not that smart.
Or that deep.
Nor that deep, but Mercury and Neptune is very curious. Again, for those of you who don't know that much about the real dynamics of the planet, because Mercury is how you think, and Neptune, excuse me, Neptune is about illusions and fantasies and mistruths. And I think that Trump has been kind of, in a way, lying to himself for so many decades that he doesn't even know how to distinguish what's true and what's not.
No, I think he's the epitome of delusional character. I think he has visions of grandeur, which he has achieved. We can grant him that. He has certainly made a play for himself. But when I saw him waltz out onto the stage of the Republican National Convention in that bank of fog, I said, my gosh, if ever there was a Neptunian character, this is it, because that's what Neptune does. It obscures the truth. It obscures reality. And the fact that he's a reality star, I mean, it's classic. I mean, it's classic in every definition of what Neptune really is as an archetype.
That's right. Well, I do these new and full moon newsletters each month, and I've been stressing that recently, that when there's an obscuration like that, it becomes very difficult to know what someone is actually thinking and doing. And I found out recently that he's been affected in some way by an advisor to Putin in Russia. About 4 or 5 years ago, Putin was having real trouble with the Russian population, and so this young man who basically comes from the theatrical world basically said to him that if you continually contradict yourself, no one's going to be able to follow what you really believe.
Oh, that's true.
And it gives you an incredible degree of freedom because you can essentially do anything. I think one of the big issues now is that Trump promised so much to so many people that he's never going to be able to keep those promises. And he's already backing down on dismantling Obamacare. And there are just a lot of symptoms, I think, that actually show that it's going to be extraordinary, because Neptune Mercury square is also incredibly idealistic. It's like you just can't do some of the things that he's intending or claiming that he can do.
Right.
And I think it'll be very curious to see how that plays itself out, because government is not that easy. You may have a plan, but that doesn't mean, even though he's got a very slight majority in the Senate and the House, it isn't really a huge majority. So I think they're going to be and I think there are a lot of people in the Republican Party who don't agree with what he does.
No, he's made a lot of enemies, and they've come out. Of course, now they're sort of, crawling backwards slowly just to sort of make amends. But I think that the classic definition is illusion and delusion. I think that he thinks we can make deals. He thinks you can just walk in, sit down with the Chinese, and tear up a contract and say, you do this, I'll do that, and walk out again. He thinks it's like, signing a lease on a rental apartment somewhere. I don't think he has any grasp of how much, tearing up NAFTA, for example, stopping TPP. Well, they probably will stop TPP because the Republicans want that to have Mitch McConnell. All those guys want to do that, so they'll follow through on that. But he can't unwind NAFTA. That is way too complicated for him to even consider.
Also, another interesting factor is that Trump was born on an eclipse. Mm-hmm. And he's got sun and moon exactly opposite to the degree, the sun in Gemini and the moon in Sagittarius. Well, what that means is that it's not a very good sign for a president, because presidency is all about diplomacy and about interacting and doing deals. Well, Trump's so oppositional that I think that's going to get him into a lot of trouble, basically, and that it will produce a situation where those oppositional dynamics just don't really work all that well.
No, the opposition is a very, very difficult aspect to have at birth, because of the simple fact that his emotions get in the way. We've seen it already. We've seen
Right.
how short his fuse is when it comes to Twitter. We've seen how quickly he can become inflamed over the smallest things. And this is actually a very large concern for all of us, because he is the guy with the nuclear codes. I mean, all somebody has to do is just look at him the wrong way, basically, and he goes off the deep end. Hopefully they'll put some checks and balances in there for that. This is really, we are treading in unprecedented waters here, unlike anything else we've ever seen in history, other than the point that you made about the Uranus return, going back to the 20 degrees Aries, going back to 1932, which brings, of course, across a very dark picture of what happened in Europe at the time.
That's right. Well, just to repeat that for your audience, I discovered a couple of months ago, actually partially through a conversation with an astrologer, Adrian Duncan, who I respect quite a lot.
Yeah, I know Adrian, yeah. Mm-hmm.
We were talking about Uranus and the idea that the Uranus cycle is 84 years. And Uranus in Aries shows, because Aries is very individualistic and very impulsive. So Uranus in the sign Aries means unpredictable people are likely to come to power in such a time. And of course, Uranus is in each sign for 7 years, and the complete cycle is 84 years. And so I just went back in history and discovered, of course, that the last time Uranus was in the same degrees of Aries as it was earlier this month during the election was in November of 1932, which is exactly when the German National Socialist Workers' Party, i.e. the Nazis, came to power in a federal election in Germany. Mm-hmm. In fact, the original election was in June, but the National Socialist Party agitated so dramatically by having forces disrupt, very much like you see some of Trump's audience being very politically and aggressively disruptive, that they actually rescheduled the election for November. They had a second election because they didn't win a majority. And to everyone's great surprise, they won a majority in November. So what's interesting is that within 2 months, Hitler had ordered the Reichstag, which is equivalent to the Houses of Congress, burnt to the ground and rescinded democracy. So he then initiated a kind of fascist government and essentially targeted Jews, obviously, and foreigners of all kinds. And he was saying not just chuck them out of the country, but murder them. And so I think it's a very, very dangerous precedent. I'm not predicting that Trump is going to be an Adolf Hitler, although Bernie Sanders did imply it very early on in the election. But I do think it's a really shocking precedent in many ways that this Uranus and Aries quality can be triggered like this. And, Trump has Uranus conjunct his sun and opposite his moon. And Chiron right now is at 20 to Chiron being the wounded healer, and about wounds that we carry and so on is at 20 degrees of Pisces right now.
In his seventh house, yeah.
It's mutually square to both that sun-moon opposition. Sun conjunct node opposite the moon, which is the eclipse dynamic. So Chiron's triggering that ellipse in Trump's chart right now. And it's not surprising, therefore, to see his choice of, his major domo as a guy who's a white supremacist.
Right.
I mean, I think it's really quite scary. I mean, you can see all this in Trump's chart, and it really isn't. It isn't a very nice situation at all.
No, and the parallels are very real, and this is what we see with the recurrence of a return. We see similar themes at a different time. Time is like a corkscrew. So yes, the theme recurs down the road further at a different place in time, but the fact that the dynamic is there and the personalities and the theme of the election is so similar, and it tapped into this public distaste and discourse of the turning away from the elite, the liberal elites, which is kind of backfired on us because we would think of Trump as being a rich elite, but it all came down to Hillary Clinton as the liberal elite, and her basket of deplorables comment and sort of coming across as a little bit holier than thou certainly didn't help matters much in that regard.
No, and people really underestimated Trump in a way, or they underestimated how angry the population of America is. Yeah. I mean, also look at transiting Saturn's at 15 degrees of Sagittarius, and in the next couple of months, around the time he's inaugurated, it's going to be right on his eclipse.
Yeah, very
it's
tough.
Going to be right on the moon end of the eclipse, and that's pretty hairy stuff because he doesn't take criticism easily. He's going to have a very thin skin. He's going to actually try, I'm sure, to really do something radical with the media, who are not his allies. And in a way, we're going to really rely more and more on the media to keep things in check. But who knows whether that's going to work or not? I mean, it's a very, very strange and difficult situation right now.
Well, he's got a lot of heavy hitters on his team. He's got Steve Bannon. He's got Roger Ailes on his side as allies, and both those guys are media masters. They know how to manipulate the media. The only thing we have going for us is the fact that there is we all have the ability to put our own material out there. We have our own ability to capture stuff, just the way the Hollywood Access tape was captured. We have the ability to capture these things. But the interesting thing that is he tapped into the American public in a way that I think was really um, something I've always longed for myself, even though I can't stand the man, was the simplicity of talk. He didn't get filled up with this political rhetoric, this hyperbole that politicians tend to do. I remember listening to Hillary Clinton talk, and I thought, my gosh, she is just not getting her ideas across because she doesn't have that warmth, that humanity. Not that Trump is warm or human, but there's a certain animation that he brings to the table when he talks, when he uses these, these very short phrases, make America great again. These things stick with people. They're not these long, rambling diatribes that go on and on, loaded with policy that people just glaze over when they hear her talk. That's a large part of it.
Yeah, of course. Well, they're just short diatribes.
Well, they are, but exactly. But they come across. People can remember them. They latch onto them. They're sound bites, and we live in a very fast-paced, sound bite-oriented society. It makes sense. It makes sense that they would latch onto that, and they did. And that's what I think a large part of what people liked about him. Even people who were not typical Republicans liked the fact that he sounds like a regular guy. I think he'll do fine. Little do they know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is a pretty extreme situation. There's no question about it. And actually, I'm looking at Hillary's chart right now. Also, the one that is it's probably close to the correct one, which was 2:18 in the morning.
2:18 a.m. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Central Standard Time in Chicago, on October 26th, 1947. They're both the same age, obviously. But the interesting thing is that transiting Saturn in Hillary's chart is exactly on the IC opposite her midheaven. Right. So she's got to be incredibly irritated and upset about this because she really made a massive miscalculation.
I think she and everyone made a massive calculation. I don't think, and the irony it just ripples. Although it's classic astrology when you think about it, because here's a woman who stands for the basic embodiment of feminism, taken down by the worst, outrageously misogynist man of all. What could be worse? What could be more adding more insult to injury than that? It'd be one thing to be taken down by Jeb Bush, but to be taken down by this guy who is just over the top, even makes it sting that much more, I think.
That's right. And that's really quite a big issue in all kinds of ways, because, this idea of selecting Supreme Court judges, that he may be in a position of choosing 3 or 4 of them.
Absolutely. You could
because
shift
3
the
of
whole
them are in their 80s already. And,
Mm-hmm.
and in addition to Scalia replacement, but I just, the whole situation is like, they can't have really been very clever about it because they totally miscalculated.
They did miscalculate it, but I think that they thought for sure. And what bothered me, I think in some ways, I read the New York Times religiously, and across the bottom of the page, every day for the last 15 months, they showed Hillary with this enormous lead. Everyone got this wrong. Our eyes were taken off the prize, which may have been part of the reason we thought this was in the bag. I think if people knew this was the outcome was coming, we would have gotten maybe a heavier voting turnout, although she did win the popular vote. So.
Well, also, but I think apparently third-party candidates also won quite a bit. Yeah. I mean, I read somewhere that it could be as much as 3 or 4%. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people were voting, assuming that Hillary was going to win, but not really actually voting for her and making a protest vote. It's very much like what happened with Al Gore. Exactly the situation.
Very, very similar. And I think there was a lot of closet Trump supporters, people who did not want to admit it, but were fed up with the establishment and just voted because they knew that no one was watching.
That's right. I'm sure that's the case. And it's just really a shocking testament to the whole situation. And that, it's interesting that all of these astrologers really did get it all wrong, even though she did win, the general vote. But still, I don't know how you can really predict accurately what happens in the Electoral College.
No, apparently you can't. Although we should, as astrologers, that is what we lay claim to. I did hear a few astrologers that got it right. I think, as I mentioned, the Vedic astrologers, many of them could see it happening. Joni Patri called it correctly. And I think it is interesting to note that there is some validity to that. It's a different approach of looking at it. But I think overall we totally had our eye off the ball, which again, in some ways, is a Neptunian influence. We were deluded into
Yeah.
thinking that this was true. Neptune's in Pisces. Is going to be going direct. Maybe we'll all wait when it's going direct this week. Maybe we'll all wake up when we say, "Oh my gosh, look at the trouble we have wrought here."
Right.
I think that we can't underestimate the Saturn Neptune square, which was
No.
predominant throughout the whole period that the election was running, the whole 15 months. And I don't
Yeah.
think we can overlook the presence of the Pluto return in the U.S. chart either, as a time of what I guess what surprised me the most, and we were talking about the other day, was that we always expect the pendulum to swing. We know that this is a dualistic world we live in. The pendulum's going to go left, then it's going to swing back and go right. I think what struck me about this time was the drama between the disparity of the pendulum's arc. So we went from left-wing African American, first African American liberal Democratic president to the other extreme, which
Right.
there was no stopping in the middle. It was just went right all the way over. And that's what's hard, that's what's disturbing to me, and that's probably the Uranian influence of the surprise hitting us like a bolt of lightning out of the blue.
Yeah, I think so. And also part of it is that, of course, there's a real trend that's being exhibited all over the place of right-wing governments. Russia, China,
the Brexit, yeah.
many of the European countries. They're even saying that Marine Le Pen may well be the next president of France, and it's happening in Denmark and Belgium and Germany. And it's really fascinating that this right-wing change is happening. And I'm not saying it's because of this Uranian cycle, but actually the same thing was happening 84 years ago, which is that a lot of the countries in Europe after the First World War, became much more, well, they leaned to the right for sure in terms of their policies. Much more restrictive, a bit more isolated, a lot less interconnected. And it seems as though that's a trend that obviously is happening here now as well.
Yeah. No, it's definitely happening in Europe. It's creeping across Europe as well. And there's been talk of Netherlands leaving the European Union. There's other countries that are considering it. And now if with Trump in charge, NATO is, I don't think NATO is going to go away, but NATO is on the table. It's a talking point. They're talking about, changing the rules of NATO. And it's very scary to see. Although we have to say that there is an element of accuracy that astrology brings to the table because of the simple fact that, yes, we've been here before, and yes, this is what's happening, and yes, we should have seen it coming, and I think we did. I expected it to be a revolution of sorts. I never discounted that. I thought a revolution of sorts was inevitable. We've seen it since 2008 when Pluto entered Capricorn. We're witnessing the reconstruction. We have to be able to frame what a reconstruction looks like, and if this Trump election becomes a precipitating factor for us to have a revolution, then that to me sits okay. We have to have, if the roof did not leak, we would not fix it. So now we got the roof is leaking, we have to fix it. That's the analogy I would try to tie to this in some sort of way of making me sleep better at night.
Well, the curious thing is that it's not a left-wing revolution, it's a right-wing revolution.
I know.
Which is a totally different thing. And I think that's, that's really what's defined as fascism. So, it's not coming from the area it's not coming from Bernie.
No, it's not.
It's coming from the other direction completely.
And it's regressive. That's what gets me. It's regressive. And I think that history is like a ratchet where you go two forward and one back. I think there's that whole sort of give and take with the nature of the universe and the cosmos and how we respond to it. But This seems to be this is a major wake-up call. And I think that the fact that it occurred is going to be a startling reminder of how fragile our country is and our public opinion is, but also can serve as a wake-up call for progress in the other direction. I think that 2018 elections will hopefully bear that out.
I think so. I think it's very interesting, and I think a lot of it will hinge on the fact that, again, as I said before, that Trump made all kinds of promises to simple Americans, and that if he doesn't keep them, they're not going to have much patience with him.
No, they will throw him down very quickly. Yeah.
Also be a situation where all kinds of things start to really hit the fan pretty quickly. And, I don't know how much time he's going to have on his hands to be able to do that. But a lot of things like lowering the tax rates of wealthy people and and deregulating the banks and all of that. That's a catastrophic situation. And the very people that he promised he would be helping and who voted for him are exactly the ones who are going to be cut out of the loop.
That's right. And if he cuts in all the health care plans and the people who depend upon him, you look at all the red states, they're all the ones that are, drawing heavily on some of these health care subsidies, and yet they're not going to be able to have them. They're gonna go under the bus, literally. And
that's right. And also, the public, I always think about as being associated with the planet Pluto. And Trump does have Pluto in the 12th house. He's not really known for helping people who are on the down and out. In fact, the exact opposite. He tends to really take advantage of such people. So I think that may be one of the real underestimations of his approach to this whole situation now, which is that plutonic dynamic of the public is going to be something that could rouse up and bite him.
Yeah, it could. I mean, Mars and Pluto are both in Leo. They're kind of a wide orbit, like 16 degrees apart, which is a little bit wide, but they are both in his 12th house with Mars on the ascendant. At 26 degrees, according to my chart. He does have that Mars quality. That's the whole big ego out there, being very flamboyant and the showman in him. But I think the proximity of those two does bode well for what you're saying. I mean, it does support what you're saying, is what I mean by that.
Yeah, I think that I think it is kind of interesting, that particular dynamic, because planets in the 12th house are it's a drive for power, Pluto, as well. But being in the 12th house, it's actually, it's kind of a very funny place to have it.
It's kind of an unfortunate place to have it. It sort of spells out, dark endings in some ways. And this could be the crumbling and the end of his empire. I mean, this really could be his Waterloo. By a weird twist of fate, people would say, well, you achieved the presidency of the United States. You've gotten to the highest rung of the ladder. But this could also come at a cost that wipes out everything he's ever had in some way and destroys his brand.
Well, his salary, I don't know how much the president makes, but I think it's only $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000, and
right.
that isn't gonna do well with balancing the books of Trump's life.
No, it's not going to do well with balancing the books, but he's going to have to find a way to run his businesses in other ways. That's the real challenge.
Right.
Anyway, we're going to take a quick break here. We're talking today with Tad Mann. His website is atmann.net. Interesting stuff on there. Lots of fabulous artwork. Tad has got his hands in a number of different areas that are well worth looking into. Books, fantastic books about astrology, wonderful books about architecture, the cross-generation of nature and the cosmos are all there. So I encourage you to have a look at his site. And we'll be back in about 2 minutes, and we'll continue up with our conversation about what do we do now. So hang in there. We'll be right back. What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today. Or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, Diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color. Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My guest today is Tad Mann, and he's the first person I thought of when I got the election results because I really wanted to hear his take on, this is such a classic, in some ways, a classic astrological story, archetypal astrological story because of all the components that are involved in it. We've got the secretive Scorpio woman. We've got the bombacious and bombastic Gemini leader. We've got everything is there. We can see it so clearly as through the astrologer's eyes. It's very clearly evident there. And yet none of us really saw this coming. Although, when we look back historically, as Tad has mentioned, go back to the Uranus return, 84 years ago, 1932, we find ourselves right smack in the middle of the birth of the Nazi Party, which is very disconcerting. And when we look at this, when you look at the Pluto aspect of the United States, the Pluto return, do you think that this signals a precipitating event for radical change? Is this the trigger that gets everybody up and off their seats?
Well, I think it will. I think it will have a much deeper effect than anyone anticipates. I mean, I can feel it in my gut. I mean, I'm still having this very strong sensation of almost like I got hit in the solar plexus the other night. Mm-hmm. And it's very curious because it has a visceral quality to it that I think has really affected a lot of people. And it's a pretty extreme wake-up call. There's no question about it. I mean, Pluto's quite far away from the Pluto return in the U.S. chart. It's still a number of years away. But I mean, he could be in office for 4 years. And also, Pluto is directly opposite the sun in the U.S. chart. Mm-hmm. So, I mean,
it also signals sort of the archetypal representation of Pluto would be sort of tearing down, a reorganization, and then out of the ashes rises the phoenix and we begin again. This could very well be that. I mean, if we get to the situation that we see, we have this sort of racial divide, we have the economic problems that are pending.
Yeah. I mean, also, the progressed sun in the U.S. chart is in Pisces, and it's like we have been rudderless for a period of time. It feels like. And it's actually the progressed and solar arc sun is exactly square the ascendant, and trine the sun of the U.S. chart, which is at 13 degrees of Cancer. So the progressed sun at 12 degrees Pisces, and then trining the U.S. sun at 13 degrees Cancer. It's and connected to Saturn as well. I mean, it really to me looks like it could precipitate major change, but I don't really know what that's going to look like.
Right. I mean, again, getting back to the analogy of the pendulum goes so far, it's going all the way as far as we thought it could possibly go to the right. What does that look like? What kind of events does that trigger? It may be, in many ways, it may simply come down to the fact that this is a president that may not make it through his whole term by virtue of the number of indictments he's got, by virtue of his own party may sort of circumvent him in some ways. There may be all kinds of stuff that happens. We just don't know. But I know that his appointment of Steve Bannon is radically, discounted by both sides of the party. I mean, that's something that's everybody's a little bit concerned about, and rightfully so. It's interesting.
Right. No, I think that really is just an indicator. It's like reneging on the promises he made about cleaning the swamp in Washington, for example. It's like he's choosing the cast of characters that have been there all along in the Republican Party to take over in this new government, like Giuliani and the rest of them.
Yeah.
It's these are the guys whose time is really past. It's not
very much so, and yet they're getting a second burst of light here. I mean, Rudy Giuliani, when I saw him at the Republican convention, I thought the guy was going to have a heart attack on the stage. He's talking about us being attacked and everything else, and it just inflames the rhetoric and gives many of our enemies a raison d'etre. I mean, it gives them a reason to be here. It gives them a focal point from which to fight us, because they now see this inflated rhetoric, anti-Muslim rhetoric, and this. It inspires them. I don't think it does nothing to deter them. It inspires them.
No, I mean, a lot of I lived in Europe for 30 years, and I have a lot of very close friends there, family as well as astrologers there, and I mean, all of them just said that the countries in Europe are just smacking their fingers together in a way, thinking that this is just an amazing situation, really shows America how vulnerable it actually is. I mean, the Chinese and the Russians, the connection between Putin and Trump is really a kind of alarming situation as well. I mean, I don't know where that's going to go or what it really does signify, but certainly it's a cause for alarm. There's no question about it.
Well, it's definitely probably a little cozier, and I think the Russians were rooting for Trump. And of course, we know that they were infiltrating the email system and stuff like that. So that certainly is disturbing in itself. We are sort of in a whole new world now. The internet has brought many great things to us, very much in a Uranian fashion. The birth of the internet, where it's gone, is that spark of invention and innovation, which is very Uranian in itself. But it's also introduced an elephant in the room that is so large and so dangerous we don't quite know what to do with it.
That's right. That's right. And also the Saturn-Neptune thing is still really very much in play, as you mentioned earlier. I think of Saturn as being boundaries and security, and Neptune about a lack of boundaries. It's like a boundary-free zone.
And when I was talking about this on one of my recent shows, I was saying that I thought for sure that Saturn would be the winner, just because I defer to Saturn as being doing the right thing. It may not be pleasant. We may not have liked what Saturn was telling us, but this is what reality is. Saturn was like the Hillary Clinton school marm telling us to go home and get our homework done when we didn't want to do that, and yet that didn't resonate. And much of this has also come from the fact that the Republicans were so obstructive all through Obama's administration that people became frustrated by the obstruction that frustrated the average American Midwest or whatever middle country person who voted for Trump was put in place by the same people that they thought they were overruling, which in fact they just gave more weight to, which is the other irony. It's just.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's just such a weird situation. I get the sense with a lot of my friends and so on that they don't really quite know what to do.
Right. That is the problem. We don't know what to do. We're all being fogged out by Neptune. We're just not seeing it clearly. It really seems to be that time. Although we have to look for some silver lining in this cloud somewhere. I do believe that Neptune has the ability to raise people's consciousness and to bring them to a more heightened spiritual sense of place, like they did back in the 1848, when Madame Blavatsky was around and the Transcendentalists. I think there's some ability for that to rise as a result of this. It may form a stronger bond with that regard, but we've got to get through this as well. I mean, these things do happen. For every action, there's a reaction, as we know. And so this action that we've just endured will spawn a reaction, I think, which will probably be positive. I have to think that in some ways. And I don't know. I feel the same way you do. I'm very much conflicted. I don't quite know what to make of this. I want to be optimistic. I want to think the best. I want to find some silver lining in this dark cloud, but it is a hard one to find.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, also just the whole fact that half the population actually voted that way for anger. And there are just so many incidents happening of, foreigners being or minorities being attacked all around the U.S. and so on. It's like, I just hope it doesn't really escalate along those lines, which is very saturnine actually, and could be really problematic in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, and the thing is that the enemy that they talk about, the enemy of being the sort of the all the American jobs going overseas, really has very little to do with the problem here. It's even more ironic since Trump's ties were all made in China. I don't know why they didn't make a bigger deal out of that. And I don't know why they didn't make a bigger deal out of his tax returns, but that's neither here nor there. But much of, I heard something the other day on the radio that the United States still makes as much steel as it ever did before. It's just that it's now made by robots. And they make it in the South where the taxes are lower. And they don't have to air condition the buildings because they're machines that are running them. So everything is done by automation. That's the real criminal here. It's not.
Well, of course it is, and it's not going to. And Trump's not going to change it. He's not going to bring back those jobs. But I'm saying that was one of his great promises to steel workers, to all kinds of manufacturing people, to the auto industry in Detroit. I mean, those jobs are never ever going to come back again. Never. So it's about a set of policies that are so opposite to the Republican Party in a way, in the sense that what needs to happen is a huge investment in education and forgiving a lot of college debt and all of that, which Trump is now saying he's going to do, but I don't believe that that's going to happen for a second.
Well, I would certainly love to see it happen. Since my son has got a lot of student debt, I would love to see that happen. I might even like him for a half an hour if that were the case. But I don't know. I am disturbed by it. I mean, and that is what they said. The people that voted him in, they do expect this result. They do expect the jobs to come back. They do expect, the automobile manufacturers to leave Mexico and move back. It's just not going to happen. And even if it did happen, it's not going to happen within the span of 4 years. No. Or that's a 10-year cycle, I think, for those things to change that quick. And this has been going on. Globalization is going on ever since the internet and before and beyond. So this is nothing that's going to be happening overnight.
But also another interesting fact, Chris, is look, Trump's eclipse is right on Mars in the U.S. chart at 21 Gemini.
Right. Wow.
It shows something pretty radical. It's square Neptune, and it shows radical change. I mean, all kinds of even violence. So I think there, it's not like there isn't a precedent for this, and I really just wonder what's going to happen if you get the number of people that voted for Trump suddenly turning in a different direction and angry about the fact that he's not delivering. It could be a very curious situation arising for sure.
Do you think that he's at risk himself as a figure, not so much physically, but through the course of, the machinations of the government, having his powers limited, or him running into he made it through every scandal possible.
I know.
I mean, he was totally immune to all that stuff. I mean, Gary Hart got busted back in the days when he was running for president for having an affair. Trump can do whatever he wants, did whatever he wanted, and got away with it and didn't bother anybody.
I know.
It's sort of all the rules have changed in that regard. But I wonder if the rules, now that he's elected, the scrutiny under which he's being held is going to be far more than it was on the campaign trail. The campaign trail is sort of a circus. You can get away with whatever you want. You can say things. You can get the crowd stirred up. But when he's got to sit there and have a press conference or meet in front of the UN and make an announcement in front of the UN, how is he going to be able to do that? Does he have the wherewithal to do that? He can't put in a substitute, and then, of course, that leaves us with Pence, if it does come to that.
Which is even scarier in some ways.
Yeah, it's scarier in many ways. I mean, he's got a whole other agenda that's very regressive. I think that, when I listen to people like Bernie, who I also see as an outsider in some ways, even though he is an insider, but he was a radical. He wanted to change things. He wanted a revolution, and I voted for him in the primary. When I think of him, I think of the types of changes that he would have made had he been there. But he spoke to the same electorate because he was talking about the change that they wanted to see. They didn't get the change that they expected with Obama. And I think what it illustrates more than anything else is that you can't change this thing so quickly. This is a big ship. You can't turn the ship around overnight. And
it's absolutely, if you can turn it around at all. I mean, it certainly does beg that point for sure. I just think that the changes that he's really talking about are ones that are going to be highly emotive, because they affect really almost the whole country.
They do.
And already you see how charged a lot of these things are. It's like people think they want this radical change, but once they get it, who knows whether they're going to be as
be careful what you ask for. Exactly. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, and he's when you look at his transits, he's got, as you mentioned, he's got Jupiter going through his second house now, crossing over his natal Chiron and and coming up to his Jupiter return, right?
Yeah.
At 72, he would get the Jupiter return,
right, in
his second house. But Jupiter can be a demon as well as an adversary. I mean, it inflates whatever it touches.
It does. You're right.
And so this could actually bring him down to the point where his whole financial empire collapses. For someone to, as Obama said in one of his campaign speeches, it was like, if anybody out there thinks that this man who has been self-serving for 70 years is all of a sudden going to turn around and be out for the little guy, that in itself is a grand delusion. It's the grandest delusion of all.
It is. No, I agree with that completely. And and there's no way you can, and again, I mean, I think it's really also, I mean, we're both, you and I are both incredibly biased, which we have to admit. But
oh yeah, I do agree that.
But the Republican Party has not really been for the little guy. It's all about top-down economics, and the whole idea of that 1% really being given even more breaks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that probably will excite a huge amount of anger, and it could spill over. You never know.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. We are biased. There's no question about it. But I think that if we look at this through the lens of astrology, we can easily see this making sense. This is a puzzle that works, astrologically speaking. I'm not saying I condone it or anything. I'm just saying when you look at what happened and the method which it happened and the way it occurred, this is this is accurate astrology. It speaks right to the dynamics of what the charts presented us with, regardless of who you look at, whether it's Trump's chart, whether it's the U.S. chart, whether it's Hillary Rodham Clinton's chart. They all hold up to this. And I think that we were perhaps more wishful thinking when we were talking about the predictions of what we saw. Right. And we never envisioned that anybody as outlandish as this would get as far as he has.
Right. No. I mean, I think just the fact that of Trump's progressed in solar arc sun going right on his ascendant right now. I mean, quite literally on election day.
Yeah, I know. It's right there.
His ascendant is pretty astonishing because, it's moving a degree per year, and it's 72 years from, 72 years from where it was when he was born and when it crosses that ascendant. Yeah. And I do think he's stepping out into uncharted Virgo territory. And I don't think he's going to like it. I think he's going to get a lot of criticism from abroad also. If he starts dropping out of alliances like NATO, and I don't think he's going to get out of NATO, but I think to get out of some of these trade situations, it's very much like Brexit in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be so easy to do.
Oh, no, I know. It is interesting. You look at his sun creeping into his first house in Virgo. Virgo, we know it's detail. We know it's sensitivity. We know it's criticism. We know it's, it's an earthbound, a service-oriented sign where he has his progressed sun now. That is going to be totally anathema to everything he's stood for in his life, and to have it square his Gemini sun. Eventually, it probably has another 11 years or so, but still, it is a tight, wide square. But it sort of undermines and gets under the skin of everything that he is, which I think is perhaps the irony of it all. It's like, you wanted this so badly, and now you've got it, and it's the poop is hitting the ventilator, as they say, and what's that look like as he goes forward in this area? And I do want to think of it in terms of some restorative quality here. I think I want to phrase this and perhaps impart to people who listen or follow us or whatever, to think that there is perhaps a element here that may be redemptive. I'm just having a hard time finding it. That is the problem.
No, I got what it's interesting because I'm just looking right now at the aspects. His ascendant doesn't really aspect almost anything else in his chart. Being at 29 degrees of Leo, and that's true for his progressed sun at zero Virgo.
Right.
The closest aspect, and the one that's going to come up next, is a semi-square to Jupiter.
Right.
I mean, to his natal Jupiter in 2 years.
Yeah.
That's not good for financial situations. The semi-square being the whole idea of conditionality. I mean, I look at semi-squares and sesquiquadrate aspects as being conditional aspects.
Conditional meaning that they are tied to where he is at the time.
Yeah, instead of unconditional.
Right.
Like a conditional aspect being, I hang in there with you as long as you do what I want you to do.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you don't do what I want you to do, then I withdraw my support.
And that's in his second house, which is
in the second house, which is about his finances.
Yeah. And I mean, how are they going to figure out the blind trust? You can't have a blind trust and have your children run that. That just doesn't float. I mean, and then Rudy Giuliani says, well, he can't put his kids out of work. Well, no, he can keep them afloat somehow. I wouldn't worry about them being out of work. If they're anything of the entrepreneur that their father is, they will find a way to get by without daddy's money. But that is a major thing that he's going to have to give up. Well, I mean, there's parts of it makes me feel like he's not. He may almost say, I don't want this job. I mean, could he say that?
I don't know. There was an NPR program about a week and a half ago it was a psychiatrist that apparently knew Trump years ago, worked with him in Manhattan, and she was just saying that she just thinks that and this was at a point in the whole process when people were wondering whether Trump really wanted to be there in the first place.
I've always thought that. I've always thought that.
And she just said that that he probably isn't really prepared for the degree of scrutiny, the necessity to really make decisions that affect huge numbers of people, and to really feel the repercussions of that is, it's a whole other thing. And he's never been in that kind of situation at all. Mm. So I just think that could actually be very prescient in a way, in the sense that he just doesn't really know what the circumstances are going to bring.
I mean, you're similar in age to him. Can you imagine taking on something like this as a job? Wouldn't you rather just go to the beach?
Oh my God, yes. That's exactly what I'm thinking.
I mean, what is he thinking? I mean, he's got a beautiful wife. He's got all the money in the world. Why doesn't he just go and be a big game fisher or something like that? Why has he got to go and do this? Why can't he go out and...
He's probably wondering that right now. And if he isn't, he's going to, in another couple of months, he's going to really wonder when Inauguration Day rolls around. I mean, it's interesting. An astrologer friend of mine in the UK even said that, she just thinks, and she's a very, very good and astute astrologer, she just had this funny feeling that something really catastrophic would happen to whoever was elected. And at the time she said this, she didn't really know who it was that was going to be elected. But I just think it's very interesting, that whole dynamic. And I don't think anyone who's ever taken that. Well, what she was also saying, interesting enough, was there's like a history of madness in presidential candidates. Like FDR and JFK, and they have all kinds of borderline psychiatric conditions.
Oh, I think you'd have to.
Or Lyndon Johnson being incredibly paranoid, or Nixon, and his own brand of paranoia. That the office itself it makes very stable men unstable.
Of course it does, and it ages them dramatically. And it is the most singular, isolating position in the world. I think there's no way that you could have that job and not be isolated. And I suspect that Trump, being the kind of the acerbic person that he is, has always been a very lonely man. So the lonely part of it may not bother him so much. He may be more used to it than, say, someone like a Ronald Reagan, who was a glad-hander, who enjoyed the public spotlight as an actor. This is a man, I think, who is used to sitting in his ivory tower, literally, and just sort of being isolated. I think he's a very, very lonely man, and he's compensating for that by running this popularity contest to sort of assuage his loneliness. But
no, I think that's very much the case. They say that he doesn't have any friends. Mm-hmm. I mean, literally no friends at all, and doesn't really have people that he trusts and talks to, and that may be echoed in the kind of people he's choosing to, to help run the government and so on. But
there was even that funny shot of him looking at Melania voting to make sure that she was voting for him. He looked over the booth. He's, "Are you voting for me?" You know, even his own wife, he can't. And I'm sure that that's, you know, a fraught relationship as well. So I do believe he's pathetically lonely man, and I think that perhaps this is the right. He will fit into that role, okay, but I think the rest of it is going to be a complete and utter disaster, and we don't know what to expect. And you know, far be it from us to try to speculate, because there's too many unknowns here, especially given the cadre of people he's got lined up around him. I mean, who knows what goes on now with all those folks.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, let's get on a happier topic before we sign off here. What sort of things have you got cooked up in your world that you're doing these days? I know you had mentioned that you've been working on a film for quite some time about Vivekananda. And,
yes, I've been working on a film about Vivekananda called First Guru. Mm-hmm. And if you search on Google, you'll probably see the website that we've made. You know, Vivekananda is spelled Vivekananda, and Vivekananda came to the U.S. in 1893 and founded. You know, he spoke at the Chicago Exposition. And, you know, it was like bringing Vedic philosophy to the world, and which includes yoga and meditation. It's interesting because after the ISAR conference in south of L.A., I went and spent some days in Los Angeles, and I went to go see one of the oldest chapters of the Vedanta Society, which is in Hollywood, in the Hollywood Hills.
Interesting, yeah.
I spoke to the old Swami there, and he showed me the room where a number of young students in the 1920s or so spent a lot of time meditating, including Aldous Huxley and people like that. Just, you know, and Vivekananda knew Tesla, and he knew Sarah Bernhardt, and knew William James, and he knew a lot of the real cultural heroes of his time, and he affected their ideas, like he affected eventually you know, Joseph Campbell, for example, and the whole Star Wars thing that Campbell influenced through George Lucas and so on. Mm-hmm. A lot of these ideas. There's a new Star Wars movie coming out. The idea of the Force is very much about that kind of Vedic view of energy, and Tesla was drawn to the same thing. So it's very interesting. So look up the film First Guru and Vivekananda and take a look, because we're still looking for people to help us back it. And we've been taken on by a wonderful PBS station in Chicago I think it's called WTTW, and they've become a great help, and we're expecting to release the film sometime in the spring.
Oh, that's great. So there's the upside to that. I think that there's what we want to look for. We want to try to find that silver lining, and perhaps this is what accelerates the process in a positive way, because we've got so much of this negativity on the one side of the spectrum. Maybe this sort of infuses this and gives life to your projects in that way as a counterpoint to what we're currently facing. So,
well, I hope so. Just one last thing is that I really did in my last newsletter mention the whole idea that we can't just give up, but rather we need to hang in there. We need to, you know, show our love and to bind together and bond together. And along those lines, if you look at my website, atman.net, you'll see that there's a link to a lecture, not a lecture, but an interview I gave in England in January to a homeopath and astrologer about healing and astrology. And I think actually it's very relevant to what's going on now, meaning that we need to bind together. We need to ally ourselves with people of similar mind so that this doesn't happen again. And so the effects of it are minimal.
So when you say healing and astrology, do you mean with specifics to the mundane characteristics of the world and healing as a group, or do you mean specifics? Did you get into specifics with regard to science?
Well, yes, because it's about environmental things. Mm-hmm. I gave a talk at UAC on autism and the Asperger's spectrum, and it was very, very interesting because, you know, in my research I began identifying planets that are associated with the causes of these illnesses, like Saturn and Neptune. Saturn being a lot of women who have autistic children undergo depression either before birth, before conception, during gestation or after birth.
And they also have been medicated to offset that, which has then created part of the problem.
And they've also, many of them, particularly since it's risen dramatically since the 90s up to the present, around that time, doctors began prescribing antidepressive remedies that women took while their children were developing in utero.
I know someone who had that happen to them.
It affects the brain because the first 7 weeks after conception, the ninth house in the chart, in my lifetime astrology system, is the time when your brain is created. And if you see Saturn there, it indicates depression. And if you see Neptune there, it indicates toxicity or drugs or things of that sort.
Yeah, no, I know someone who's has been faced with that, and it's very real. It's a very real situation, and seems to be uncanny. And of course, they don't. When you do the clinical trials, you don't have enough time span. Just like we didn't know about thalidomide back in the day, how damaging it could be. And this is a very similar situation that has now become epidemic.
Right. And the funny thing about it that I realized, of course, in preparing this talk for you, for ISAR, which was very successful as it turned out, is that the funny thing, and it's not funny, but it's the interesting thing is that the planets that describe the causes are also the same planets that describe characteristics that are true of autistic and Asperger's people, which is they have a very narrow focus.
But when they're focused, they're very focused. They're almost like a savant, right? They're
totally focused. That's very Saturnine. And Neptune is about finding it incredibly difficult to do just general social things. Mm-hmm. So I think it's actually very, very interesting that the causes and the symptoms are actually very clearly matched. And so as a result, I'm actually also looking for anyone who either has autistic or Asperger's children, particularly the mothers, to send me information, and I'll be more than interested in analyzing it and getting back to you. So in case
I can follow up with you, because I actually know 3 people in particular who have that same situation, who are young mothers who were on antidepressants at the time that the babies were conceived, and the babies are not normal. I know that. Right. I know 3 people, so I can get that to you.
And the more extreme the cases are you see both Saturn and Neptune in the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th houses. Mm-hmm. And if either one of them's outside of it, they tend more to Asperger's.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I will definitely get through with that. Well, anyway, it's been great talking to you today, Tad. Folks, I encourage you to go to Mann. It's atmann.net. You'll find a wide array of Tad's books. I've got them all. They're fantastic books. They're great with regard to astrology. I mean, Tad's a very unusual man in as much as he's a focal point for art, spiritual, and art, astrology, and spiritual venture, which is much the way I feel about the world is too. It's where all of these things, geometry, the natural order of the universe, and the spiritual qualities of ourselves all coalesce. So I encourage you to look there. You'll find fascinating topics about astrology and sexology. You'll find astrology and trees, the nature and the landscapes, the overall arching placement of us in the realm of the cosmos. Fascinating stuff. I encourage you to go there and check it out. And thank you very much, Tad, for coming on today. And at least, if nothing else, we can cry in our beers together and commiserate over this mess that we've got.
Hey, we'll do that soon, Chris.
Very good. Nice to talk to you again, and thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Be well.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.